Hello, and welcome to the Dr. Money Matters podcast, the show where we discuss important financial topics that were never covered in med school. I'm your host, Dr. Tarang Patel. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast. This episode is about taking control as a physician and learning the value that you bring to the healthcare system. Many doctors don't understand their dollar value as practicing physicians. It's not discussed formally in most training situations, and generally we're pretty happy with the increase that we get in salary from residency and fellowship to when we become attendings. My guest today, Dr. Ali Chaudhary, had similar experiences that many of us did when he transitioned from training. However, he decided to do something about it and start his own locums company when he realized how much these agencies were making on top of what they were paying him. So in this episode, we talk about how he started his own company, why he did this, and along the way, I hope his experience can help other physicians discover their own value. We discuss the pros and cons of going independent, and we also briefly touch on his interest in angel investing. He's from Silicon Valley, so it comes with the DNA out there. Angel investing is high risk, high reward that has become more accessible for most physicians recently. And I'm not recommending it for everyone, but we should be aware of these investment avenues. His services from the dollar value that he was paid in relation to the dollar value that the locums company and his employers were actually billing out at. I think most of us don't necessarily realize the true value of the services that we provide. Rather, we mostly just focus on the take-home pay that we get. And while it's important to understand that, and I'm a big advocate of understanding personal finance, I also think it's important to understand the value of the healthcare that you provide, how it actually is being billed out as. The more information that you understand about this side of it, the better off you will be on a personal financial level as well. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast. My guest today is Dr. Ali Chaudhary, an emergency medicine physician who is the president and chief medical officer of Locum Physicians United. We're going to be talking today about his experience transitioning from traditional practice into his own independent model. Ali, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about, your educational and training background.
Sure. I went to Ross University in the Caribbean in Dominica, a small island, which was unfortunately devastated by the recent hurricanes. And so I graduated from Ross in 2011 and then started residency in Akron, Ohio at Akron City Hospital for emergency medicine and completed that in 2014. And then was hoping to go back to California, which is where I'm from originally, the Bay Area. But, the cost of living is just prohibitively expensive. And so it didn't make sense for me with my, huge student debt to start out living in a place that was going to, be so expensive. So my wife and I ended up moving to Pennsylvania, to Allentown, where we had some friends. So I've been in Allentown since then and had worked as an employee at a pretty large hospital system not too far from here, one of the highest volume ERs in the country. So great, pathology, great staff, great people to work with, great colleagues, and I actually loved my job coming out of residency. And then kind of decided to change things up a little bit.
Okay, so now let's go into that a little bit, because you're a pretty recent graduate, and most physicians who have gotten out of training recently, one of the knocks from the older generation has been that they don't think in terms of the independent model. They're mostly tend to be employees. And like you mentioned, one of the driving factors, I think, is the reality is that the loan debt is so high. And then on top of it, you're saying that, you really liked this job and it was a good job. So what made you transition?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I worked there for 2 years and honestly just loved it. I mean, I felt like it was part of my family, like my home away from home. I really felt comfortable in my surroundings. But at the same time, I felt very uncomfortable with myself as well. I guess I looked around me and saw people who had been working for 5, 10, 15, 20 years and were sort of in the same system. And something about that for me, just I couldn't envision myself doing the same thing for the next 20 years. Not that I don't like medicine. I mean, I love what I do, but I believe I started to kind of connect with with myself and did some sort of soul searching and felt like I wanted to do something in addition to medicine that was something completely different. What that was, I didn't really know, but I knew that I couldn't envision myself working full-time as a physician for the next 20, 30 years. And I think there's multiple reasons for that. I think when we go into medical school, or before we go into medical school and when we're in training, we have this sort of idealized version of what we feel like we're going to do when we get out and how life is going to be when we reach the light at the end of the tunnel, And when I got there, it was kind of like, at first there's a lot of excitement and there's, you're getting a big paycheck and things are great. Then after a while, I think the sort of the infrastructure of healthcare and the way that your practice is dictated by things beyond your control sort of started to kind of, put a damper on the whole thing for me and made me feel a little bit jaded, I guess, early on. And so I kind of was like, this isn't what I thought what I was going to be doing. There were, so I think that a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of physicians, they kind of feel similarly jaded, not necessarily because they hate their jobs or whatever, but I think that there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of, administrative constraints and restraints that, make physicians practice in ways that may not necessarily be the way that they would prefer to practice. So I think that those are some of the things that led me to kind of start thinking about, okay, well, what am I going to do in addition to this that can help me feel more fulfilled?
Okay. And so how long were you into your, because you said you just trained, you finished training in 2014. How long into your job before you first started noticing those kind of feelings?
It was about a good year and a half. Initially I was just trying to get myself comfortable coming out of residency, was practicing by myself and developing my own practice style and not having attending looking over my shoulder anymore, So it's just kind of getting used to the practice of medicine, which obviously it's a lifelong pursuit. But I think I started to kind of just notice some of these ideas and things kind of start to turn in my head about a year and a half or so into the job.
Is that about the time you started this company, or?
So the company started because I started doing locums about a year into my full-time job as a way to help pay off my student debt a little bit quicker. I had a good salary, but I felt like I needed to work a little bit more aggressively to try and pay off my debt. I didn't want to be I have pretty high interest loans. So I didn't want to be in debt for too long. So I started picking up some shifts on the side through the standard locums companies that are out there. Had a terrible experience for my first locums job, and then was fortunate to have a decent experience for my next couple of ones. But then I quickly realized that after working, about a week or so at one of the sites that I enjoyed working at, I was making as much money as I was making in a whole month at my full-time job. So that definitely piqued my interest. I was like, this is interesting.
And this was during, you were still working through one of the agencies.
I was still working full-time. And I was working through other agencies, right? And it was actually my cousin who had encouraged me to look into locums because he had left his full-time job at a large hospital system in California, which provides great benefits and all that stuff. He had ended up doing locums full-time. He's also an ER physician in upstate New York and was telling me he was doing much, much, much better financially than he was in California. So that definitely kind of, got me to start thinking about it. And as I started doing locums, continued to do locums, I started to realize that financially, first of all, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to stay at my full-time job anymore. Just the amount of time that I'm spending, working 15 to 16 shifts a month full-time, 10-hour shifts, I could work maybe 60, 70% of that and make more than I was making my full-time job. So just from a numbers and time standpoint, it didn't add up. And I also, as I was doing this, the locum side, locums, I started to realize that there's many inefficiencies within the system itself. And I also started to learn about the amount of money that these locums companies were making out of my work. And, and I'll just give an example, let me just put it in just percentages. They were making about 50% per hour of what I was making. So for example, if I was making, I guess my math may not come out right here, but so if I was making X amount per hour, $200 an hour, for example, they were making $100 an hour. And when I learned about that, I was like, wait a minute, I'm the one who's doing all the work here. Of course they found the job, they got the contract, and they, had somebody send some emails back and forth. But I'm the one seeing patients. My malpractice is on the line. My career and all that stuff is I'm the one in the trenches doing the work. And these guys are just chilling, sending some papers back and forth and making things happen and making half as much as I am. Like, they didn't do half as much work as I did to get here, So something about that just didn't sit well with me.
Okay, so let me go into that just a little bit, because that's I think the numbers are exactly what people are unaware of. I mean, outside of locums and traditional real estate and stuff like that, a finder's fee sometimes is usually 10%, maybe a little bit more. And you're talking these, if you had an agent, if you're an actor, it's also about 10%. These guys, the locums companies, were making 50% for every hour basically that you were working. And so if over the course of the week, you billed out at $10,000 for the week, they actually charge $15,000 to the hospital.
Right. And that varies. There's not a standard 50% that for every company across the board. That the industry average is around 23 to 35% or so. A lot of it depends on how much the doctor knows to ask for. In the beginning, I just didn't know how much my value was really as a physician. And so I didn't really ask for much. But then I started to kind of realize and learn along the way that, listen, my value, I can ask for a lot higher than what they're telling me. Because remember, they're salespeople, and the way that they earn money is by commission on what they take home. Otherwise, they don't get paid. So the goal is to bill a hospital as much as they possibly can, and then pay the physician the least amount that they can that's reasonable that the doctor will take. And so they can have a large portion in the middle that they can take home, or percentage of that,
No, I think that's critical. I think you just expressed something that a lot of physicians, particularly those who are coming out of training, don't really understand, is what their value is. And as you learn that, obviously, for most people, it takes years to really understand the value, the monetary value that they provide. And so, I'm glad that you're talking with our audience and kind of helping disseminate this information more readily, because honestly, that's what this is about, is that, we physicians have a certain value, and these companies provide a service, and they should get compensated for that. But I do think that what we forget to realize is that it's negotiable. Everything is negotiable. So I'm glad that you bring that point up.
And, and that's a great point that you mentioned about the value. And I think that, as an employee, oftentimes, you don't really get a sense for your market value, because I think that oftentimes doctors coming out of residency, look, when you get paid 40, 50 grand a year, jump in, and if you triple or quadruple that or more, you'll take it. You're not going to argue a whole lot. You might shop around a little bit here and there, but you don't really understand your market value well. When I became a free agent, I guess I call it, and I started kind of shop around doing independent stuff as a locums, I then started to really realize what my market value really was. I think part of what the employee model does is it kind of makes you, they throw some benefits at you and then say, well, hey, here's quote unquote stability, but here's a modest salary or decent salary, then and let's not talk about that too much. But when you kind of venture outside of that is when you kind of, get to see the other side of the coin, and you're like, wait a minute, I have a lot more earning potential than I thought I ever had. And this isn't just my experience. This has been several people that I know personally who've had a similar experience as well.
Right. And so let's, again, I think all these are good points. And I think the numbers, like you said, you were making more, you were working, 60 to 70% in comparison to what you were as a full-time employee. Now, you were employed were you in a private practice, or were you a hospital employee previously?
I was a hospital employee.
Okay. So you were, at that point, you were pretty much, it wasn't like a partnership track where you were on a graded salary increce. I mean, how did you get compensated previously? Was it a salary?
Correct. It was a salary.
It was a salary.
It was salary with, with the percentage of that being a bonus based on your performance and all that. But mainly it was a salaried position. Yep.
Okay. And so when you made the transition, when you left that practice, what kind of feedback did you get from your colleagues? Were they saying you're crazy, or were they like, wow, I wish I could do this?
I think it's interesting. People think it takes some level of courage or bravery to go out and do something like this. And I find it hilarious because I'm making more money now than I ever did. So there's almost there's no, I didn't skip a beat. As a matter of fact, I'm doing better off. I'm better off now than I was, in terms of financially and having the time to start my own business and do other things that I've been wanting to always do. So yeah, people, it's not a standard thing. When you get out of residency, when people graduate, the typical sort of job path that people take is, okay, maybe you'll join a hospital as an employee, like I did, or you'll join an independent, democratic group, and you'll have some equity in it after you earn that after a couple of years. So there's some buy-in and all that, or you'll join like a large contract management group like the Team Health, MCare, and those big large corporations. Those are pretty much the only. Private practice is, I think, slowly being phased out as the corporatization of healthcare continues. They're making it more and more difficult for private practices to exist, and there are some out there still, but I think even these democratic groups are going to find it harder and harder to compete with all the money that's out there with these big corporations. So the locums model is very, there's not much information about it. It's kind of an unknown, and people tend to fear what they don't know. So people meet it with skepticism. They weren't really sure if this was a good decision for me, and I had all these questions. And I wouldn't have done it just all of a sudden going blindly, because I didn't know about it much myself before I actually started doing it alongside my full-time job. So I think that helped me kind of get clarity on, okay, this is a path that I can take that is not that hard. There's not a whole lot of challenges to it. There are some. You just have to kind of approach things a little bit differently. But I totally prefer this because I have way more flexibility. I can choose my schedule. I could choose to do no more nights for the rest of my life if I want to, and I can earn more. So
let's talk about a little bit more about this. Like, so when you decided, okay, I'm going to do this, and you were doing in addition to your full-time employed position, you were doing this part-time. You initially were getting locums recruiters asking you to work, and you were doing that. Then when you decided, okay, you know what, I'm not going to use them, I'm going to try to do this on my own. How did you do? Did you contact hospitals yourself? Did you set up the malpractice yourself? How did you do that?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate, having come from the Bay Area, that my brother, he is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He's been in finance and had a few startups of his own. He ran a accelerator in Berkeley as a CEO for about a year, and then recently he started up his own seed fund where they invest in early stage companies. So he's like the business startup guy, basically. He and I started talking, and I had been traveling back to California ever since I graduated from residency maybe a couple of times a year, and kind of seeing what he was getting involved in and what he was doing with these startups and all, and it really piqued my interest as to just exposed me to a world that I had no information or knowledge about before, because I was so focused on residency and boards and all that stuff. And that kind of really inspired me. I found that the culture of the Bay Area and Silicon Valley and startup and entrepreneurship and innovation that is there to be very motivating, and kind of motivated me to do something as well. So then I started talking to my brother about what I was doing with locums and whatnot, and just kind of complaining to him about how slow and backwards and inefficient the whole the industry is, and it just takes forever to get this done, and everything just so antiquated. And he kind of suggested, hey, well, why don't we look into ways to update this whole system and introduce technology to make this whole thing more efficient, more smooth, and just different. I was like, okay, that's an interesting idea. So then we started researching the industry for about 7-8 months. We spent, just all our time that we had to talk to people on the inside, outside, read everything that we could online about everything that we could get our hands on, and came away with the, confidence that, and that feeling that, we could do this. We could do this better than what's being done outside. It was at that point that I kind of decided, okay, I think that, instead of me going to other companies, I should do this on my own, with my brother, of course, as a co-founder of the company. Because truthfully, I don't have a business background. I never entertained doing any business, but having him in my corner definitely helped to kind of start the endeavor.
What are you doing monthly in terms of your clinical work now?
Yeah, so I cut back. I work anywhere from like 6 to 8 to 9 shifts a month, ER shifts.
And what's the standard for a full-time ER physician?
They work around 140 plus hours. If I want to say, that's how much I was working full-time, about 140 hours a month. So I guess shifts-wise, you can break it down depending on how long your shifts are. So I cut back to about 6 to 8 shifts on average. And so, that my schedule right now is a little bit hectic because, if I wanted to, if I wasn't starting the company, I would have 22 to 24 days off a month. And with that, I could do whatever I wanted to do, which I'm choosing to do to start the company. So I'm actually a little bit busier than I was working my full-time job because I'm doing the company as well. But I think that's a fair payoff. There's fair payoff there. So, I work pretty much Monday through Friday on an average week on the company, business development, getting contracts, talking to doctors and getting placements done. And then I'll work every other weekend, like 3 or 4 days, every other weekend, and maybe a shift or two here and there scattered throughout the month. There's some travel involved in that as well. Of course, I travel maybe once or twice a month for about a week on average for business development and whatnot.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about your company specifically in just a second. But one of the things I think that prevents physicians from going, independent is benefits and insurance. And on our Facebook conversation, you had mentioned that that's not that difficult. So explain to me.
Sure. One of the things that people have a misconception about is, my work pays for my benefits. That's actually not true. You're paying for your benefits still through your work, and your employer is taking that money out of your paycheck and giving the rest to you. So it's not like, all of a sudden they became altruistic and gave you a bunch of benefits for free. You're working for those benefits. So I look at it like this. I had the same concerns obviously before I made that transition, but I had luckily some people who had been through this before me who can kind of guide me in the right direction. So I have contacted a few different companies who work with physicians who are able to basically sit down with you and anything that you would have lost at your full-time job as your benefits, your 401k, your health, disability, life insurance, they can basically do that all for you. I went through a company called Northwest Mutual, and I met somebody who's been very, very helpful there. They helped me get health insurance, disability, and life. I'm choosing not to put money into my retirement right now because I have other investments that I have my money in that are yielding much higher return. So I'm kind of using my money for that. But
if you wanted to, you would have.
Oh, totally. Oh, yeah. They have that all that set up for you. So it's not like, as a doctor, you don't want to be like, oh my God, I just lost all my benefits. Now what do I do? Who do I call? That's like, it's a daunting task, right? So sometimes we would rather just go with an employee who's paying us less or making our life a little bit more miserable because we're having to work so much than to figure out the benefits on our own. It almost seems like it's such a daunting thing that we'd rather just not do it. But it's totally easy. I could, I've directed multiple people, friends of mine, to these different resources, and they've been happy with the benefits that they're getting. So, it gives you flexibility. The health insurance, if you're an independent contractor, you can form your own corporation, LLC or S Corp, and you can get your benefits through your company, and that can be a tax deduction as well. So, there's the whole tax side is another benefit of being an independent contractor, where you can write off things like a car or your home office, part of your bills that you're paying for your house, for like electricity and all, cell phone bill, mileage and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole other episode, but there's so many more tax benefits for being an employer, in this case, an independent contractor, than an employee. So yeah, that's true. I think the health insurance one is what scares a lot of people, particularly, with the proposed changes to the Affordable Care Act, possible repeal. That's the part that is a little bit tenuous. But honestly, it's tenuous even as an employee, because you might, if you're part of a large corporation, you might be able to get those benefits, but it's not like it's going to get cheaper. Insurance just continues to get more expensive, and it might be more expensive as an independent contractor. But on the flip side, like you said, you can write off more things. So
you can write it off, right? And then oftentimes people who are employed, I know people at their jobs who are unhappy with their current health insurance that they're getting through their employer. So it's not like it's a great, necessarily a great all around, like they're providing your benefits and everything's awesome. This way you can actually kind of be more flexible in the type of company that you want to engage with and get the type of coverage that you want that fits your situation best.
I think it's great that you were able to do this, and I hope physicians at least start thinking more about this. And I do think actually with the advent of technology and more telemedicine things, that there will be more options for physicians to become independent, whether it's part-time or whether it's full-time. So I think it's great that you were able to kind of explain how you did it. Now let's talk about your company. So you said you're spending, a big chunk of your time in the running and setup of your locums company. So let's talk about it. What are you guys doing? When did you start, and where are you guys now?
Yeah, so we technically incorporated the company last year. So I think June of 2016. And I was still working full time until I think September, October of last year. So didn't get a chance to spend too much time on it because I was still working full time, and we had a baby last year as well. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So I was just obviously very busy with that. And then it was around this year when I kind of just was able to free up more time and work on my schedule, with the locum schedule a little bit more, to kind of tweak it in a way where I can have more time to dedicate to the company. So yeah, we started last year. So we really kind of got in full swing in January of this year. It's a tough business because there's just so much competition that's out there. There's literally like hundreds of locums companies out there doing the exact same thing, placements and all that. And the thing that made me want to get into it was I felt that there was two things that I primarily wanted to address. One was the lack of efficiency and just the way that things are being done is just so old school and antiquated that I'm just like, having known and knowing what my brother's been doing in Silicon Valley and then the things that are going on there, I'm just like, there's no reason why things should be this backwards.
Give me an example of what you mean by old school.
So, I mean, we have to fill out multiple applications. So for each hospital that you get credentialed at, you have to fill out the same information, like your demographics, where you went to school, where you graduated from, what your step scores were, like at least 2 or 3 times, the same stuff. The same forms, the same information. And then they'll send you a packet sometimes by FedEx where you have to hand fill and all this. And so, when you're done, when you're working, they'll email you a timesheet. You'll have to fill out the timesheet, print it out, fill it out, take a picture of it or scan it, send it back. And wow. This is like from 20 years ago.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
This is like 2017. There's a lot of that has happened since then. And I think that part of it's because the locums industry, it hasn't really been challenged. There's several dozen that are the more dominant players, and they've been around for like decades now, and they've built infrastructure, that over this time that sort of necessitates them having, these big companies and lots of people running it. But like nowadays, the trend is just doing more with less. And so, especially having exposure to that from Silicon Valley and what my brother's been doing, it kind of got us to start to thinking about, okay, well, what things can we do to minimize the amount of overhead and the people that were on board with our team, but we're maximizing the amount of work that we're doing. So, without getting into details, we're implementing some ideas from the beginning. We have been implementing some ideas that have made it much more efficient on our end. And we have a lot more things in the pipeline that once we kind of we're a little bit further along, that we're going to be introducing to really ramp things up.
Good. And so you guys are currently providing services in obviously emergency medicine, I'm assuming, but are you guys doing other specialties as well?
Yeah. So we do have. Hospitalist medicine and ER are our sort of bread and butter right now, just because that's where most of my personal contacts are. But we do have connections and doctors from just about every specialty who want to work with us. We have neurosurgery, we have CT surgery, we have dermatology, vascular surgery, you name it, cardiology, IR. So just about every specialty of people. We're not heavy in any one of those just yet. That's not where we generate the most revenue, but we're definitely pretty diverse in terms of our physicians that work with us.
Okay, and then tell me. Basically, obviously, the technology part of it you're mentioning, but if I was a physician in a hospitalist or so, tell me what I could get from you guys that maybe I'm not getting from the other companies.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, on the surface, everything else kind of seems the same. Where we provide staffing, and so does several dozen other companies. So what's different, right? Being that we're physician owned and operated, I think that makes a big difference. We recently met with the CMO of a pretty well nationally recognized hospital system, and we explained to them that what our goal is to basically communicate well with the hospital, the program that needs help, and to really get a sense of what is it that they're looking for. I think a lot of what these companies do, I'll give you an example of my first scenario with the locums company was, they threw me into this hospital that was a terrible situation. It was understaffed. There was residents all over the place. Some of them were presenting to me. Some of them were sending patients home without telling me. And so after my 4 shifts, I'm like, I'm not going back there. And the recruiter's like, yeah, well, we've been having some difficulty, retaining doctors here. And, it's whatever. I'm like, man, well, it would have been nice if you gave me a heads up about that before I got in there, And, across the board, when I speak to hospital executives, CMOs, CEOs about their main gripe with locums companies, and across the board, they say, and this is verbatim for what one of them told me, he's like, yeah, our experience with locums companies is hit or miss, and more often than not, it's miss. In terms of the quality of candidates that they're presenting, so there's not much of a vetting process that's done. People are just, the salespeople are looking at it from a sales standpoint. Look, if we could send a doctor over and make some money, that's better than not sending a doctor over and making no money, because their compensation is directly tied to that particular placement. But we look at things differently. I mean, I think that if we, being that we're physicians, if we're able to vet the people that come on and that we place, because we don't just take anybody, that we have a vetting process, that we are able to provide our clients and the hospitals that we're working with just good, solid candidates. And that prevents, them to have to get rid of them 2 months later and start the whole process again, which is time consuming, it's costly for them. And so we've had pretty good success in our discussions with the hospital system that we're currently connected with. And they like the model of us, being physician run. Like, we understand, for example, if there's an ER somewhere that's like a level 2 or level 1 trauma center, and I have a doctor maybe who is the ER, but maybe he or she's worked rural medicine for the past 20 years. I probably wouldn't want to put that doctor in that level 1 trauma center, right? Because they probably wouldn't be able to hang. Now, I understand that because I work in the ER, I understand the flow and the challenges that would potentially present, but that's not necessarily the case with somebody who doesn't have that clinical experience. So, I think that practice of medicine that we understand on a day-to-day basis on what goes on in the ER in terms of the flow, the waiting room, the patients that need to be seen, the staffing, unless you're in the trenches, you don't have the understanding. So we understand that, and I think that gives us definitely an edge over these other companies. And a lot of hospital executives like the fact that we're doing things differently in that regard.
Okay, so that explains the how you can present to the hospital system, and I'm assuming your retention rate and physicians taking a second assignment and, maybe a recurring assignment at a particular place is better. But what about on the physician side? I mean, one of the things that we talked about at the beginning was the overhead cost that these staffing agencies will take. Is it better from you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we're very lean right now. We have a staff of about 5 people, including myself and my co-founder. And so, we're able to do a lot more with a lot less. And so in doing that, we're able to, I think, incentivize our doctors and again, just make the process a little bit less painful for them, because we do a lot of the work for them. I think that doctors find, one of the main pain points that I had doing locums myself was just how long it took for me to just get a credentialing packet and fill it out and send it back and all that stuff. So a lot of these things just take a lot of time. And if we're able to do, and some of these locums companies do parts of these things, some of these things, but we're looking to save our doctors, because look, I understand we don't have time. If we're not working clinical shifts, we don't want to be doing other stuff and fill out crappy paperwork and same stuff that I've already done 10 times before. So if we can make that process less painful and incentivize our doctors more, and just connect them with people that we already know and collect them with clients that we know are good. Like I said, the first hospital that I was placed at was a complete disaster. And so we don't just take any hospital system or any client just because of the business either. So we do a careful vetting to make sure that this is something on both the physician side and on the hospital side, to make sure that we're only partnering up with doctors and hospitals that are going to give each other a great experience. Because otherwise it's a waste of our time.
Sure. Okay. One last question. What do you see as the downsides of someone going independent? Obviously, we've talked a lot about the positives and things like that, but what do you see are some of the downsides?
The downside is potentially that you'll have to travel, depending on where you are away from home. That may mean that you have to spend maybe some time, some days away from home. For example, myself, I'll spend about maybe 6 to 8 days a month where I'm not at home at all. I'll get a hotel wherever I'm going for 2 to 3 days at a time, and then I'll come back. And on the flip side, you just have more time off overall. if that's what you choose to do with your time. So that it balances out. So I don't really see that necessarily as being a negative, but some people do because they don't really see that sort of big picture. The other negatives, I guess you don't necessarily get to have that sort of long-term relationship with a particular hospital or a group of people. Although the last locums job, I'm the one that I'm working at even currently, I've been there for about a year and a half, so I've definitely developed that. So, and a lot of these locums jobs are kind of long-term or ongoing, and some are much shorter. But the interesting thing is that, people think that there's no stability in locums. The physicians, we really just need to understand that, there's such a massive shortage of doctors across this country. There's just such a massive shortage that the hospitals and these other, they need us more than we need them. Once you get that understanding sort of firmly ingrained into you, and I remember once that kind of hit me, it kind of makes you like feel empowered. You kind of feel like Neo all of a sudden from the Matrix, where you're kind of like, you feel like I can do anything now. Like this is the ball's in my court, and I can dictate the terms on my own, how I want them, not be told I have to give X number of shifts every month. And, so I think that kind of it's a bit of a shift from being told what to do to now where like you're the boss and you tell people what to do, meaning you tell the jobs that you're working at when you want to work, how much you want to work. So it's a bit of a shift, and that takes me a little bit of getting used to, because I think oftentimes doctors, because in medical school, residency, you're told what to do. As an employee, you're pretty much told what to do. So when you do something when you're as an independent contractor, now you have to kind of think a little bit differently. So there can be a little bit of a learning curve there, I think, before you figure out, okay, I can use this to my advantage.
Right. You mentioned a little bit about the stability factor. Do you see any downsides? I mean, I would imagine that locums, if all of a sudden, let's say you're doing a locum assignment in a place that, had a hard time attracting a qualified physicians there to work, directly for them or for their covering group. But do you see any maybe less stability because now maybe someone does come there and then maybe you lose that assignment? Is that a concern?
Yeah, I mean, you always want to keep your eye out because look, these hospitals don't want locums. I mean, that's kind of they want to have full-time employees or whatever working there because, it's an additional cost and expense for them to bring locums on that they'd rather bring on employees. So that's understood. But at the same time, over like 90% of hospitals in the last year, I think this was the last year, study that was done last year, have utilized locums. So the need is extremely high. And so the way to usually do it is to have your foot in the door at least 2 hospitals and be on good terms with the scheduler and the director at each site. So that way, you let them know that, listen, if anything comes up, if you guys are hiring, if things seem like they're going to be winding down here, just give us a heads up so that way. And then the locums company will also do that as well. Well, we do that at least. And so we kind of anticipate that if things are, and they'll usually tell you, well, we anticipate it'll take us about a year and a half to recruit somebody here or longer. And if it's shorter, they'll give you a heads up. Okay, looks like somebody's, we're going to get a few candidates who are interested to kind of start working here in a couple months when they start credentialing, because they're not going to start immediately. The credentialing process takes 3-4 months. So that gives you enough of a heads up where you can start planning for looking for other jobs as well. So that's, I guess, a potential downside if you don't know how to play within that system. But if you understand how it works, you'll start looking for other jobs in the area or elsewhere.
Sure. And to be honest, I mean, there's really not much stability left, whether, even if you're an employee or if you're in private practice. So
a great point. And people may have heard of Akron City Hospital. That's where I had my training. This was a fantastic group of doctors that I work with that trained me. I couldn't have been happier with the training. And, they'd been at that hospital for like 30 plus years. And, overnight, they were kicked out, by another company that took over the contract. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of what happened. It's everywhere. But, people talk about stability, and anybody can come at any point, take over a contract, and you're done. So there's a false sense of security in an employed position, which I think doctors are they upplay. And then, there's a false sense of insecurity in locums that people don't really understand because they don't know how it's done.
Right. And I think that's the mentality that was, and 20 years ago, there was a perception of, if you're locums, you're just going to be moving around and if you're a private practice, you have stability. But you're right. I think, if anything, the instability of locums has probably been matched now because, like you said, contracts in any field are being traded left and right by hospitals and by corporate entities and stuff like that. So I think the reality is that, I mean, at least my philosophy is that you're better off getting paid now. and doing the right thing with your money now, because there's no guarantee whether
there's no guarantees about the future.
Exactly.
I'm with you.
I think that was, it's a good decision that you made. And I hoped that this episode can kind of inspire some of our listeners to, at least look at locums or just going independent in situations where they weren't, even if it's just to augment their current situation. So
exactly. One of the things I will just say, just to end the locums thing, is that one of the things that I really want to do, and it's part of my mission of this company, is to really make this locums lifestyle to be more mainstream. Like, I want this to become something that becomes more acceptable. People know more about it, because I think the more you're knowledgeable about something, the more easy it will be for you to make an informed decision about it, right? But if you don't know anything, you're very unlikely to venture down that path. For example, I know a neurosurgeon in California who, after his training, shortly after that, started doing only locums. He would work a week on and then take a whole week off and had to take no call, nothing, and then work another week. And then I remember he told me that this was so liberating for him, because he had like 2 weeks of his, like a month, where he had absolutely no clinical responsibility and was able to do things that he never thought he had time to do. And people, initially his colleagues and neurosurgeon colleagues, were looking at him like, man, what are you doing? This is crazy.
Right.
But then after a while, like, they started to join him, because they're like, this is awesome,
That's true, because you never expect to have a life if you're a neurosurgeon, and to be actually able to get that is very liberating.
Exactly. So I just wanted to end on that I think that, the lifestyle that is out there, that I think a lot of doctors were seeking when they left, or when they did medicine, and when they thought they were going to get when they finished residency, and that oftentimes is not there. Myself and several other people that I know who have gone locum full time have found it. So I think this is something that people should definitely consider.
Let me just add something to that, because I think that one of the issues that a lot of physicians talk about is burnout and things like that. And I think that this type of freedom that you're able to get from a locums or an independent type of career would probably mitigate a lot of that, because you have more flexibility.
That's a huge point, Tarang, because now that I work less, I actually enjoy going to work. I know when I was working my full time and locums, and I was kind of getting a little burnt out myself. It was starting to become a burden, the shift work and all that stuff. But now that I work less, I actually look forward to going to ER, doing shifts and all, which I found to be very strange, because I felt that excited to go to work. So now I actually have a very sort of positive relationship and sort of attitude towards going to work, which I think when I was stuck sort of in an employed model, and where I was, just working a ton, it kind of beats the enthusiasm out of you.
And you probably just feel valued more at this point, because you command a higher value at this point. So internally, I think that encourages you a little bit as well.
Totally.
Good. Well, no, I think this was very informative. And like I said, I want people to think about all these other options that, we just don't think about when we come out of medical school or residency. And there is a way that we can kind of customize the life that we want in medicine. And my gosh, if a neurosurgeon can do it, then it's probably accessible for the rest of us as well. So now let's talk a little bit about your getting into angel investing, and of course you're from the Bay Area, so it's kind of ingrained in your in the people from there. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing.
So I'll be honest, I didn't know what angel investing was until about maybe a year ago. I had no idea. VCs, venture capitalists, all that stuff. I had no clue whatsoever what any of that was. But then, again, like I mentioned, having made several trips back to the Bay Area to visit my family, my parents out there, and my brother who lives there and is involved in a lot of startups and does this. That kind of got me privy to this whole idea of investing and angel investing and companies and tech startups and all that stuff that I had no exposure to before. And so, he, like I mentioned, that he started his own seed fund with several investors, and he's meeting up with startup founders all the time, several times a week. He'll decide whether it's a good investment or not. Angel investing, if people don't know, it's basically, in a nutshell, you're putting in a amount of cash, could be anywhere from a few $1,000s to several tens of thousands of dollars, into an early stage company, and you'll get a percentage of equity into the company. And the goal is, you should think that money is pretty much gone. It shouldn't be money that you're using that you need on a to pay your bills or anything like that. It's usually money that is somewhat, if you lose it, you're not going to be, you're not going to miss it
exactly
necessarily. Right. And so it's money that if you lose it, you're not gonna worry about it. But the goal is, and the idea is, to invest in these companies and hope for a 5, 10, 20x return in the next 5, 10 years, which is when the company will be able to either exit or get bought out or go IPO. So I've been doing that for about the past year now, in conjunction with my brother, who started his company. And I kind of was talking to a lot of doctor friends of mine, and it seems that a lot of doctors are interested in this. And so I kind of pitched the idea to my brother, like, hey, well, maybe we should start like a fund, like that's kind of adjunct to what he's doing, but it's made specifically for physicians, and we can kind of cater it in terms of the language and the opportunities that we present specifically for physicians. And so we thought that was a good idea. And so he's developing that idea currently as we speak, actually, to kind of allow doctors an insight into Silicon Valley and to be able to invest in companies that maybe previously they didn't have access to. Because truthfully, I would have no access to these companies if I didn't have my brother doing this. So I see that as a resource, as a great resource. And I want to be able to share that with other people who understand what it is and not think that they're going to necessarily, it's not a lottery ticket that, that has winning numbers on it, but it could be. And it's making investment in people and in teams that have already shown some level of success and are continuing to kind of show growth. So, there's ways to do that as well, to make sure that you maximize your opportunity that you're in and the company that you're investing in.
Good. No, I think it's an important thing that physicians get educated about all the variety of investment options. And for the average physician, I would say that this would be, after you have, you've invested in your retirement, after you've created a decent taxable account and are comfortable paying your obligations, your student loans, your mortgages, your kids' college accounts, things like that. This would be in conjunction with that. And like you said, you have to be prepared to lose all of it. But if it does hit, it can be massive. But you should use a very small percentage of your overall net worth in these type of investments. But I think it's nice that they are becoming a little bit more accessible to physicians. But on the caveat is that I don't think a lot of physicians truly understand how long some of these companies take, especially if you're investing in the medical space, because there's all kinds of regulations that startups in tech don't have to face. So it just may be a longer runway period before you actually gain anything.
Definitely.
So, well, good, Ali. I want to thank you for coming on the show. And I like I said before, I think this was inspirational, and I think that if we can educate physicians on their value and their options, then I think we've done a good thing. And I hope that more physicians kind of follow your lead in doing this.
Thank you, Sarang. It's my pleasure. I enjoy this. I have several of these conversations a day with doctors. So this is, I'm happy to talk to people about the lifestyle, the choices, even if they want to work for us or not. To me, that's inconsequential. If you want to, it's great. If you don't want to, I'm fine with that too. But as long as I'm a resource for us doctors, and anybody who wants to talk to me about anything, you can post my email, the website, whatever. I'm happy to talk to people.
Tell our listeners your website and where they can contact you.
Great. My email is ali@locumsunited.com. That's ALI at LOCUMS United, all one word, .com. And the website is locumsunited.com.
Okay, great. Well, we look forward to seeing how your company and everything goes for you. And we'll talk again in the future.
Great. Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I want to thank Dr. Chaudhary for being my guest on this episode of Dr. Money Matters. I hope he inspired you to take control of your own career and learn more about your own financial value as a physician. Doctors need to help make the healthcare system more efficient. This is one way to bring down overall healthcare costs while keeping those of us who provide the care paid appropriately. Ali's company can be found at locumsunited.com. There's a link on the show notes. Please continue to share this podcast with your friends and colleagues on Facebook, Twitter, and you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Money Matters. And I encourage you to join our Facebook group. If you do a search on Facebook for Dr. Money Matters, it's a group where we discuss different financial topics, including those that we address on this show. And hopefully you'll gain some value out of it with connecting with other listeners and physicians who are interested in these financial topics. Another episode of Dr. Money Matters will be coming out soon, but I want to thank you again for listening.